Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan, MSPs. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 19th of January 2025. We're going to start this Ukraine military aid video with the news that, this is coming from New York Times, at the end of September 2024, the US secretly invested $1.5 billion in the development of drone production in Ukraine. This is exactly what the Ukrainians would want, which is the ability to stand on their own 2 feet in terms of their military industrial complex. The Danish model, as it is now seemingly known, is where foreign entities are investing in Ukraine's domestic arms production if they cannot produce their own stuff. So Denmark kind of ran out the ability to easily produce weaponry and equipment that Ukraine needed. They obviously, with their own domestic market or their own domestic manufacturing, they are only making certain things, and they may not be the things that Ukraine desperately needs. So what does Denmark do to support Ukraine? Well, either they buy stuff from other nations like the US, they go to the US and buy stuff for Ukraine, or they invest in Ukraine. And actually, it's preferable to invest in Ukraine, certainly for some of the equipment, because it gives jobs to Ukrainians, tax to Ukraine, so it can support its own defense, and then it can stand independently in terms of creating equipment itself for its own usage, rather than having to rely on stuff from abroad, which will be more expensive, and then you'll have to wait for the bottlenecks to be overcome, and other orders that foreign entities might have that they are trying to fulfill, as well as Ukraine. So lots of reasons why Ukraine will want to build its own stuff itself, especially if it's comparable to the foreign equipment. So the Biden administration secretly funded Ukraine's drone industry. According to the New York Times, Ukrainian drones have been utilized for reconnaissance, combat, and other missions, showcasing their versatility and impact in countering Russian forces. US intelligence officers reportedly assisted in advancing Ukraine's drone capabilities, helping to design a new generation of drones intended to revolutionize modern warfare. I've been wondering about how much input there's been from foreign nations. Yes, we have these capability coalitions, don't we? And that's seen as, so say the drone capability coalition, which is Latvia and the UK heading that, and a bunch of other nations working with Ukraine, making stuff themselves, getting them to Ukraine. But how much is about, and I particularly wonder this with regard to missile technology, how much information is being shared with Ukraine so that they know how to build effective munitions to be able to be as devastating to the Russians as possible. Are the Americans or British or whoever, French, in Ukraine giving them technological know-how and knowledge so that Ukraine can build these things themselves? Or is that giving away a competitive advantage that country has? We see this in the context of electronic warfare, where nations like the US have a really great advantage. They supposedly are, have all this knowledge about electronic warfare that they don't want to give. There's a lot of equipment they haven't given to Ukraine, precisely because it's one of the few places where there is such an asymmetry, arguably, that there is this, what's the term? Proprietary knowledge that in this case the US has, that it's very, very sensitive. So even though Ukraine desperately needs electronic warfare, and the very best electronic warfare, I mean, of all the things, that's probably what they need the most. It is one thing they're not getting so much of. How does it work with missiles? Is that the same case with the missiles, or are Americans in Ukraine helping develop these systems and munitions? While much of the US aid to Ukraine has been publicly disclosed, covering missiles, air defense systems, tanks, and training, support for the drone sector has largely remained secret. The declassified data reveals that the US allocated funds for drone manufacturing and facilitated partnerships between US tech companies and Ukrainian drone producers. So there's going to be a sense that this will be beneficial for the US as well. Naturally, it's going to be like, okay, we're going to help you, we're going to invest in your drone industry, but we're going to be getting something back from that as well. And that knowledge is a two-way street there, where actually Ukraine, what the knowledge Ukraine has is working knowledge of like these drones work best in this situation, and we know that because we're doing it because we're at war with Russia. The US isn't particularly at war in the same kind of way that Ukraine is, so there's a lot of knowledge they can gain from the Ukrainians that will help the US. And I'm sure that'll be the same with electronic warfare as well. You can build a case for the US really helping Ukraine with electronic warfare so that they are ahead of the curve, they're ahead of the game. And if they were suddenly at war with Russia, the US was, or any other nation, that they have equipment that they know works because it's been battle tested in Ukraine. These efforts intensified during preparations for Ukraine's 2023 counteroffensive, says a Kyiv Independent, which struggled to achieve significant territorial gains, reportedly due to Russia's extensive drone use. In response, the US accelerated aid to Ukraine's drone sector. Officials reportedly believe this investment has made Ukraine's drones more effective and deadly. Ukrainian maritime drones, credited with destroying 25% of Russia's Black Sea fleet, and aerial drones deployed on the front lines have slowed Russian advances in eastern Ukraine. By the end of 2024, Ukraine had delivered over 200,000 domestically produced drones to frontline units, according to Rustem Umerov, the defense minister. Interesting. A lot that we don't know there still. Now, Euromaidan Press says these first-person view drones designed to penetrate Russian air defenses exemplify how Western allies are adapting their assistance to meet Ukraine's evolving battlefield needs. So the UK government said 30,000 new drones for Ukraine in a boost to European security. I think that's actually part of the drone coalition, so it's not just the UK that involves the European drone coalition. Well, I presume it's mainly European nations. 30,000 drones will be sent to Ukraine after a £45 million worth of contracts were placed by the International Drone Capability Coalition, there you go, co-led by the UK and Latvia, as the UK steps up leadership supporting Ukraine in 2025. And a quote here, this initiative represents one of the largest single transfers of drone technology to Ukraine's armed forces, with signals a strategic shift toward providing tools that can effectively counter Russian air defenses while minimizing risks to Ukrainian personnel. The coalition's investment, part of a broader £1.3 billion international fund, has a particular focus on sophisticated, cost-effective warfare solutions. This is quite similar to what we heard from the Americans. The Americans secretly plying in $1.5 billion to help the Ukrainian manufacturing industry and help with drone tech. And here we have the Drone Coalition, Capability Coalition, doing a similar thing. And also, seeking, no doubt, to get reap the rewards of that investment. As can be evidenced from the official government website, the UK Defence Secretary John Healey announced his milestone alongside Latvian Defence Minister Andris Spruds and the Ukraine Defence Contact Group held at Ramstein Air Base on the 9th of January. The Drone Capability Coalition supports Ukraine with uncrewed surveillance and attack capabilities. Funding for the new 30,000 drones comes from UK, Denmark, Netherlands, Latvia and Sweden. Quote, these state-of-the-art first-person view drones will help Ukraine fight against Russian aggression, allowing Ukraine's armed forces to maneuver past Russian air defences to target enemy positions and armoured vehicles. The statement reads, today's announcement, which is from the other day, follows the UK's £7.5 million investment for the Drone Capability Coalition's Common Fund, set out in November 2024, and brings the UK total investment of the fund to $15 million to date. So far, the fund has raised around $73 million from the UK and partners. In addition, the Defence Secretary confirmed the UK administered international fund. So there's another fund that the UK administers that other nations commit money to, and then that's used to then put out contracts to go and get funding for, go and get equipment for Ukraine. It's just the UK is kind of in charge of that. And that stands at over £1.3 billion, of which the UK has contributed $500 million. He also outlined the MOD's plan for Ukraine's defence in 2025. To more than 50 allies and partners gathered at the meeting. John Healey discussed the plan with Ukraine Defence Minister Rustem Umerov in December 24. So lots of things happening with drones, as you would expect, because it's one of the main areas of the war, really. Now, Benjamin Tallis here, he's just written a book, I think, Turning Point. He said on Ukraine, transatlantic messaging wasn't overly encouraging, but it wasn't totally grim either. What's he talking about? Well, I think he's just been to he's just been to Vilnius in the Baltics to some kind of big meeting. He said that transatlantic messaging wasn't overly encouraging, but wasn't totally grim. either. Despite some elements that would sell Kyiv down the river, realities of dealing with Putin are sinking in. Europe remains divided on victory, security guarantees, and its own security, and is thus ineffective. He had said also that very interesting trip to Vilnius for the snow meeting. Key messages: Europeans still need to fundamentally step up on defence in ways that few, the Poles and the Baltics aside, are doing, which will help keep the US on board. US needs to accept that doing so means Europe building its defence tech industrial base. This is what I talked about so often. It's fascinating to see. I talked about this in previous videos. Sometimes, it's nice to get validation because most of what I think is from common sense and it just comes out from analysing. Like, I'm not massively widely read on, modern warfare and defence industrial technology and manufacturing. It's just you pick it up and it's autodidactic, so you learn on as you go yourself, and you're thinking, well, do I really know what I'm talking about? And one of the things I've been saying is that the more the US wants Europe to stand up and, apply more money into European security in the war in Ukraine, a la Donald Trump. So isolationist stance are like, this is your war, you need to sort this out. One of the kind of benefits for Europe and one of the negative ramifications for the US is that they then don't get as much say in what goes on, say, in NATO or in international affairs, because they are stepping back and saying, you need to step up more. So if the EU steps up more, then they will get more say about what's going on in the world. And as well, with their own strategic document that came out recently about their industrial and military strategy going forward, they're going to be procuring 60% of stuff from inside the EU. That means they will be relying less on American tech, which will hit the American industry negatively. So the more the US pushes the EU away, even if it's to say you need to bear more responsibility, and you can say arguably, yeah, okay, then the US gets less power and less economic clout and industrial clout. And that's what Benjamin Tallis is here saying. The US needs to accept that doing so means Europe building its own defense tech industrial base, and it's a zero-sum game. The whole world needs military equipment. Where you get it from, if you're going to get more from the EU, you're going to be getting less from the US. So the US will be selling less stuff. You push us away, we become more independent, we create our own industrial base that is, and then becomes a competitor. So it's not just that in this one time frame that we're going to be buying stuff from the EU ourselves, and I'm talking on behalf of the EU. I know the UK is out the EU, etc., etc. But we buy more stuff ourselves for this kind of period of time, and we don't buy it from the US, and the US goes, dang. But actually, it then means that as we develop this tech, say the SAMP-T becomes an international competitor for the Patriot 3, PAC-3. And then you have other nations going, oh, we'll buy the SAMP-T, thank you very much, and not the Patriot. So then the US loses out on further contracts and loses out in the arms export market. So it's not just a zero-sum game in the short term, it's a zero-sum game in the long term, whereby the more you push us away, the more other people are going to buy European equipment. Not just the Europeans, people from outside Europe. Australia might go, oh yeah, no, you guys, because you've been developing this because you've had to, because you've been pushed away by the US, you've been developing more of this equipment. Actually, some of that equipment's really good. We're going to buy that, and it's competitive. And that is a risk that the US bears by pushing the EU away, and that is what Benjamin Tallis is saying there. So anyway. Pyrotechnic units of the State Emergency Service received the Kozak PML pyrotechnic vehicles from Slovenia. These specialised off-road trucks are designed to transport special equipment, perform demining work and transport small explosive objects to destruction sites. So good to see that Slovenia helping out there a little bit with some technical vehicles. Now, this has been going viral. This image of Olaf Scholz, it is a perfect image, isn't it? It's so good. So you've had this spat between Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of the coalition government, but she's in the Green Party, and you've got Olaf Scholz from the main coalition, SDP, and there was a big spat the other day over 3 billion euros worth of equipment or military aid that both Baerbock and Pistorius from Olaf Scholz's own party want to give to Ukraine. And she apparently didn't want to be in a photo with Scholz and walked off. And then this photo was taken at that time, and it's just perfect. It's perfect. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock left the government meeting refusing to be photographed with Scholz after his decision to block the allocation of a new aid package to Ukraine. So he's trying to think about the elections coming up, to think about AFD, etc. But of course, people like Annalena Baerbock and Boris Pistorius are like, no, we're thinking about what needs to be done for Ukraine and European security. And so loads of people talking about this. A photo of German MFA Baerbock seemingly avoiding Scholz has gone viral, says Nell reports. Media claims she refused to take the photo with the Chancellor over his blocking of a $3 billion aid package for Ukraine. Baerbock clarified that the photo was misinterpreted, saying she simply didn't notice Scholz reaching out. So yeah, like the exact situation in that photo isn't her like walking off from him, but it does perfectly encapsulate what happened more broadly. Now, German aid to Ukraine says, as many here know, Germany's democratic parties are currently arguing about an additional budget of around 3 billion euros for Ukraine. Since I can imagine that the whole situation can be a bit confusing for non-Germans, I tried to summarise it for you in a simplified way. What's it about? What are the problems? When is the decision to be expected? What's it about? Basically, Germany's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Baerbock, and Germany's Minister of Defence, Pistorius, have teamed up to secure an additional budget of around 3 billion euros for aid to Ukraine before the upcoming elections in February. Work on this has already been underway for around 2 months, and the funds are also to be used to procure urgently needed military assistance such as additional air defence systems, ammunition and self-propelled artillery systems. This should not only mean additional military support for Ukraine in the short and long term, but also send a political signal to Ukraine: you can rely on us. What are the problems? There are multiple issues which make the situation really challenging. Germany is currently in a difficult political situation. The government coalition no longer has a majority in the Bundestag. The major parties are all in the middle of their election campaigns, and to top it all off, a single party has a different approach on where to find this 3 billion euros. According to a Spiegel report, the Chancellery, with Chancellor Olaf Scholz, SPD, I keep saying SDP, thinking it's a party. SD party is SPD. Initially blocked the package because he did not want to present the next government, whoever it will be, with a fait accompli, and also did not see any urgent need for action, as there are already 4 billion euros in military assistance secured, and Ukraine can in addition rely on the G7 loan finance from the frozen Russian assets. Since then, the Chancellor's SPD party, with a few exceptions, has claimed that it would be happy to support the 3 billion euros, but only on the condition that an exception is made to the debt brake anchored in the German constitution, because they don't want to cut back on pensions, other social spendings, or stop investments because of that. However, the other democratic parties, above all the Greens, as a second governing party, see things differently and argue that no cuts are necessary and that this is just an excuse by the SPD. According to the budget politicians, 500 million euros alone can be secured as expenditure for the Bundeswehr was overestimated for 2025, and this money could be taken. In fact, an additional 397 million euros had already been made available for Ukraine in exactly this way by the end of 2024, so it would certainly be possible. When can this decision be expected? Well, in principle, a decision can be expected by the 29th of January. On that date, the Budget Committee of the Bundestag will meet for the second time before the elections. Ultimately, it depends on whether the Chancellor gives in to the other Democratic parties or whether he insists on his position. The ball is in his court. Worst case scenario, they will not agree on an additional budget before the elections, which ultimately means a new aid can only be announced after the elections, when a budget for 2025 is finalised in the summer, which would mean losing almost half a year. I hope that I've summarised this situation well, and that everything is still easy to understand. As ever, German aid to Ukraine you have. If there are any new developments, I will of course let you know immediately, and please check out his Twitter, but mainly Blue Sky. I got this off Twitter, but I should have got it off Blue Sky. And his aid website, deaidua.org/en for the English version. Okay, so a little comment here from GNT Politico, who is in Ukraine, says performance on the ground so far with infantry fighting vehicles as of today, but could change. This is his opinion. He says Bradley has the best performance, M2A2 ODS Bradley, then the CV90, which is the Swedish provided BAE Systems created infantry fighting vehicle. Then you've got Marder, the German Marder, and then fourth KTO. So he then replies to Dawn Fox saying, this is a fact, of course, right now, their performance on the ground so far throughout the war, this can change as well. I'm here and I have a lot to do with IFVs. The CV-90 has a possibility of passing the Bradley. It just hasn't been on the ground long enough yet. But one of them will beat the survivability of the Bradley. None of them will beat the survivability of the Bradley. The others are extremely good. But with a Bradley, I've seen a Bradley be hit by over 10 drones, 2 mines, 2 tank hits, and around 5 ATGMs or RPGs, and drive away still functioning. I have to keep track of all the IFVs and ammunition they use throughout the entire International Legion. And really, the biggest complaint is operators abandoning them and not calling in a strike to destroy the IFV if it is unretrievable by us, and possibly could be by Russia. We do not want to have to start fighting Bradleys they have captured and re-engineered, or we're screwed. It's a really important point, something the Russians don't do. The amount of abandoned equipment that could be retrieved by the other side is huge. Often they do get blown up by drones dropping munitions, even from the side that could capture them. You're much more likely to see them get destroyed. But a Bradley is a really a high value haul for the Russians, so maybe they'd look to secure one of those preferably. Okay, Noel Report says, and take what your man here says with a pinch of salt. That's his opinion, but he is out there. It's kind of operating with the International Legion. Presidential Representative MP Fedir Venislavsky says Ukraine can't win Russia's war by simply increasing the size of the armed forces. We need to strike military targets deep in Russia's rear. Quote, we ask partners for advanced weapons, long-range missiles to weaken the enemy's potential. And this is talking about how if you just had a larger infantry force, that's not going to win the war. You need to be striking with missiles and drones, because these are ways of degrading the enemy without losing your own troops. So it's a really good exchange. Yeah, I'm going to lose a first-person view drone, but they will lose a tank. Bish bash bosh. Do that every day of the week, and we don't lose any troops in so doing. However, the flip side is you're not going to be able to stop the Russians taking territory without troops on the ground. Although you can replace some of those troops with UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles, and to some degree UAVs, the aerial drones as well, by striking the enemy troops as they're moving. You still need to be able to defend positions. So it needs to be a bit of both, of course. But this does talk to the idea that long distance strikes are critical for Ukraine to cripple the Russians going forward. Interesting point here from Admiral Sir Ben Kay, head of the Royal Navy, understood not to have asked for more sailors. This is not to do with the Ukraine war, but just war in general, and whether this is indeed a correct assessment already. He's not asking for more sailors in his submission to the review, so this is a defence review, believing that in 20 to 30 years, destroyers and frigates will be autonomous. So the idea that our larger ships, naval vessels, will be autonomous in 20 to 30 years is a pretty big claim. Now, Shashank Joshi, the defence correspondent for The Economist, says perhaps, but you still have to crew a navy for the next 20 to 30 years, a period in which a lot can happen, and then the human burden doesn't necessarily disappear after you build a fleet of autonomous ships. You're going to need maybe different types of naval personnel, but you're still going to need those personnel to be operating the and working as engineers on this equipment. But I think it is quite hopeful to think that our vessels will be entirely autonomous by that stage. And my goodness, we are entering the Terminator phase of reality. Okay, PS01 says, guys, read this. Kleptocracy, which is kind of corruption, stealing. It's actually with a K. Not enough money to pay for the war. So Evgen Istrebin says regional budgets in Russia are running out of war money. Restaurant and cafe owners in Saratov, that's where the Engels Air Base is and those big exploding oil tanks are, have been asked to transfer monthly percentages of their turnover to the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection account to pay soldiers. Absolutely incredible. Certainly a challenge for the Russians there, if they are going to have to start paying their soldiers by extracting more money from the from the Russian industries and from commercial entities. I don't know whether this will be enough to get a lot of social discontent taking place in Russia. They seem to be a very, very pliable population. Nonetheless, it is bad news for the Russians that. I'm finally going to leave you. I want to pay respect. Let's have this as National New Zealand is Awesome Day, as I always do, my NZ Greenstone that I got up in Paihia, Bay of Islands, where I spent a good 6 months working the best Western motel in Paihia and living at the Pickled Parrot Backpackers there. Awesome place, and then having a flat there. I didn't wear shoes for 6 months. It's incredible. So when I lived in New Zealand, lived up there in the Bay of Islands, then went down to Wellington. Me and my mate, we got an estate car covered in stickers. It was a brilliant car. Slept in the back of that. Had carpet in the back of the car, and every place we stopped had to be a thermal springs place, so we could just have a hot pool or some kind of heated joy all the way down to Wellington, and then got a job in the New Zealand Qualifications Authority in Wellington, and had to obviously wear shoes and whatnot. And the next 3 weeks, like basically the entire skin, like this thick layer of skin, just came off. Like you could make a sole of a shoe with my skin came off my feet, because I've worn no shoes for 6 months, walking on boiling hot pavement, just create this just thick skin on my feet, and then having to go and work in an office. Incredible. Anyway, that's my fun New Zealand anecdote for the day on National New Zealand is Awesome Day. Anyway, I just want to go. I don't know if this is Yvonne Lepine or how that name is pronounced there, but I stand with you, JP. I'm from NZ, and I let all my family and friends know you are a sane voice to listen to. Thank you. I have one friend that listens to you every day now. So do I. Thanks for all your hours of effort, and thanks to your family. Yes, they are very, very, very forgiving. Or she is, my partner. I stand with you, JP from NZ. Good old NZ. You're on the other side of the world, but big love. One of my sisters lives in NZ in Tauranga, and married to a triple Commonwealth gold medal winner in weightlifting. So he's a big fella. Anyway, there you go. There's my New Zealand appreciation moment. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon. All the best.